Hello and happy Tuesday. Welcome to Associated Black Charities Equity at Work webinar series. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Chrissy Thornton, and I'm so excited to be here to talk to some wonderful professionals who are here to discuss today's topic, which is workplace punishment for calling out racism. Organizations often say that they want employees to speak up, to challenge inequity, to bring their whole selves to work. But what happens when a Black employee actually does the most dreaded thing ever, names racism in the workplace? Too often, the person who identifies the problem becomes the problem. An employee who was previously viewed as talented and collaborative and committed and maybe even direct in a positive way may suddenly be described as difficult, angry, disruptive, negative, or not a team player. They may begin to experience increased scrutiny, isolation, stalled advancement, exclusion from opportunities, or negative performance feedbacks. Sometimes the retaliation is obvious and often it is not. but it can show up through changed relationships, disappearing opportunities, sudden documentation and shifting expectations, or leaders who become more concerned about the employee's tone than the racism that they reported. So, this session today and conversation will examine what happens when speaking up about racism comes with a professional or personal cost. We'll also challenge employers who are joining us today to examine whether their cultures truly allow employees to speak honestly and without fear. Because speaking about racism should never come at the expense of someone's career, advancement, or well being. So I'm so glad today to have with me two wonderful participants. I'm going to ask them to join me on camera now to join the conversation. Hello, hello.
Hi.
Hi. Wonderful. So, welcome to Tanya and Sierra. And I'm going to give you both an opportunity to introduce yourselves to those who are watching live and will also watch the playback and tell us a little bit about yourself. And then talk about why this topic was important for you to join the conversation today.
I'm happy to start. My name's Tanya Banya. I am an attorney and specifically a civil rights and workplace rights attorney. I uh, started off practicing in big law to pay off those loans, and then I very quickly shifted to doing God's work, working for people, individuals, and I have had my own law practice since 2013. And this is a topic that is always timely. So, Chrissy, thank you, and thank you to Associated Black Charities for hosting this discussion. Because now more than ever, but always, this is an ongoing concern, and people get fired every single day for bringing up stuff that their employers ask them to disclose. So, I think part of the discussion, and I'll talk about this later, but part of the discussion should be, do we even want to do this? And should we be asking ourselves that every time we think about it? Like before we do it, do we really want to do it? Is it worth it?
Absolutely. Thank you for that. And Sierra.
Hey y'all, Sierra Parks here. So very similar to Tanya's journey, I was in-house corporate HR for almost 20 years and can say that I saw the back end of this happen every single day. And about 6 years ago, started my own consulting firm, really under the premise of I know what it looks like, feels like, sounds like to sit at the table where discrimination and racism is happening. And how is it that we can teach other employers to do this the right way and really be able to welcome everyone into the workplace safely.
Absolutely. So thank you for that. And let's dig right in. One of the questions the panelists had was who normally joins equity at work? And I love that question because we never know. And typically we have Black professionals, emerging leaders. We also have institutions like corporate leaders and allies who come on because they want to be more inclusive and they want to learn more about lived experience in the workplace and those things. So I'm happy to say that we have all of those myriad of people on today, and hopefully we can learn together. So we're going to dig right in and talk about retaliation because we can talk about the mental strain of being a Black professional in the workplace who has to encounter certainly racism in the world and then again racism in the workplace. We know all the things that happen, but let's specifically go right into talking about retaliation and some of the less obvious ways it can show up in the workplace after a Black employee raises concerns. What should both employees and employers be paying attention to there? And we can start with either of you.
Well, so I actually I made a list because there are a lot of ways in which it shows up that are not intuitive at all. And increased scrutiny is certainly a thing that people think about, but increased scrutiny with respect to your FMLA leave requests is a thing, and your regular leave requests. Being designated ineligible for rehire. Being and not only by your actual employer, but other related subsidiaries and affiliates and contractors who do business with your employer. You can be designated ineligible for rehire, and as a result of that, be precluded from working for other companies that do business with your former employer. Refusing to consider you for future employment, even though you left on your own terms and in good standing. Refusing to hire your relatives or firing your relatives or disciplining your relatives. Pretty much, and from a legal perspective, anything that is adverse and could make someone think twice about complaining about racism is an action that could constitute unlawful retaliation at work.
Mm-hmm. Any other thoughts, Sarah?
No, I think she got them all. I think what you don't realize is sometimes you are not filing a complaint just yet, but these things are already starting to happen to you in the background. This could have been you mentioned something to your boss. You did go to HR. You wanted to report confidentially. You didn't want to make a report. You just wanted to put it on file. All these things all of a sudden give your employer notice that you are unhappy with the workplace and that there might be some litigation coming or some employment law concerns happening for you or them.
Mm-hmm. And naming the racism can suddenly be framed as you creating conflict. Suddenly you become the aggressor in the situation rather than identifying a problem that likely has already existed and has existed for other people before you chose to report it. So why do organizations sometimes focus more on how, when, why the employee raised the concern than on the concern itself?
Short answer, because it's true. It's true. I know that this is happening. I know so-and-so said that. I've heard so-and-so say it in other meetings. And I know that because you've now raised this, that you are not above going to get a lawyer or going to seek some type of resolution for yourself in other ways. And so I know that this is a real problem. If you didn't think that this was a real concern, you would handle it in the way that it should be handled, and you should take the complaint and process a complaint. If you're trying to cover it up, if you now instead want to focus on that person, it's because you know that you and your organization are implicit in this type of bias, discrimination, or racism.
Yeah. And they also, it's the signal that you are not willing to go along to get along, right? I think that's also a thing. Tanya?
Oh, look, I'm just nodding because I agree with 1,000% of what Sierra just said. I mean, I tell people that and this is not in any way a slight on HR professionals, most of whom want to actually perform the job in the way it's intended. This is a slight against companies that use the HR process as a claims identification process. That's what it is. It's a claims identification process and a litigation mitigation process. So why do they focus on, how you said it or what you said and you as opposed to the person that you complained about? Because it's good for them from a legal perspective. If you say, I was treated unfairly, the law may not treat that as a protected complaint about unlawful racist behavior at work. If you say, I was treated differently than these 5 people and, oh, they happen to be white, then that's a different type of complaint. And it may seem arbitrary, but the HR professionals know the difference between saying, John complained about Timmy and saying John complained that Timmy is treating people differently based on color. And so there is a real financial incentive for companies to document things in a way that protects them from a legal perspective.
So that being the case, then, and we'll talk a little bit more about HR, but then Black professionals don't have safety and protection if that is the case in these workplaces. I want to talk a little bit about tone because oftentimes when we talk about deflection, when you go to report something you felt you experienced discrimination based on race or some sort of even hate crimes happen in the workplace and all kinds of things happen and you go to report it. And oftentimes the focus becomes more on stereotypes and tone policing. Black professionals are told that we're too emotional, that our reaction is too extra, too grand, right? That we didn't we're willing to be confrontational. We're, of course, angry and too direct in these things. How do we, combat racism within the reporting of racism, right? Like, like the perpetuation of the issue. How do we handle those so that, the attention is not consistently turned back on us?
So this is one of those things where it's not what you say, it's how you say it. And oftentimes, by the time a person of color goes in to report something, first of all, they didn't want to do this. It is not often that we want to pull the race card. And so you are only in there reporting because you are at your wits' end. Someone has touched your hair for the last time, or deliberately passed you over on a raise that you know you were due for, or a role that was supposed to be yours, or even told was yours. And so you are now frustrated so much so that you even first have to have experiences, but let alone that you now have to go tell this to someone else and say this out loud. And so by the time you get in to report this to your manager, HR, senior level leaders, you are visibly frustrated. And unfortunately, this works against you because you now are sitting there trying to report something in your most frustrated, vulnerable state. It is not uncommon by the time you sit in an HR person's office, you're in tears, you're irrational. And the way that you're explaining things to them almost makes you sound like you're the crazy person. And instead, what you should do is in that moment, maybe take a PTO day when that last thing happens, go home, refer to what would have been your book of things that have happened with the dates, times, maybe you've got emails saved if you're really tracking what should happen for you in the workplace. And you then come back and you say, hey, I'd like to have a conversation about what's happening to me in the workplace in the most calm way. And if at any point during that conversation you feel like you cannot carry on in a way that is calm, your demeanor is sane, you are in a space where you feel comfortable to communicate, you should end the meeting. Once you lose your cool, you've lost your power.
I love that you said that. And I want to ask those who are watching and want to contribute to put your experiences, your insights, and your questions in the chat so that you can participate that way. I want to say that, and we're going to talk about your personal experiences because I'm sure both of you have stories to share. I assume so. I have several stories to share, having built a career in many white spaces. But I want to say that there have been times that I've gone in trusting the system to report racism in or mistreatment due to race in the most calm manner. I had done all the things you said, Sierra, and then got in the meeting, and something in that meeting happened to shift my ability to remain calm on a dime. And so it's like a little bit damned if you do and damned if you don't, right? Like we're always solving for not being deemed the aggressor or the person that's confrontational and all those things. What do you think, Tanya?
Well, I think that the that your preparation starts before you get to that point. What I always encourage people to do is, but like you should be thinking about retaliation and whether that complaint process is real or a sham before you ever start working there. So you should be on Indeed and you should be on Reddit, and a lot of industries have industry specific discussion groups like that you can go and look and see what the reality is and how that compares to all the awards that the organization pays for, right? That say they're a number one workplace, but then you look at on the employee ratings and it's like everybody says they're racist. So first know what you're going into. And then, get the handbook, read the handbook, talk to people, and then observe, because you'll see around you whether or not they take complaints seriously. You'll see it in how other people's experiences are handled. If you're complaining about someone, and Sierra, I thought this was a great point, they're worried because what you're saying is true. And they know it because they've already seen it. Management has seen it. So, and they've done nothing about it. So if you're in an environment like that, you should understand that the likelihood that they're actually really going to do something is probably de minimis. And another point, great point, Sarah, is most people are only doing that because they are at a breaking point, or they're really at a point where they have to because their employment is on the line or their dignity is on the line. And by the time you get to that point, like you should have a journal that you started from day one when things were good, so that you can memorialize that before and after, because that really, like in the law, like employment lawyers, we always talk about comparators. Well, how are they treating everybody else? When it comes to retaliation, it is really about how are they treating you before and after. And the best record of that is your journal in real time, memorializing what was going on, who said what, and the like, because those facts are difficult to overcome. And really one of the most powerful things that you can do is have a text have a text diary, something that will timestamp in real time what you memorialized about what happened, because that evidence, should it come to litigation, becomes critical.
So it sounds like we're walking into workplaces already assuming there likely is going to be the possibility of an issue. Is that what you're saying?
I think that's prudent. I think you should expect it. I would tell you that as a 53-year-old Black woman in America who, by all indications, should not have to prove herself in court with respect to basic qualifications. I'm discriminated against all the time in my work, advocating for people who've been discriminated against. So, this is, and the resurgence since Donald Trump was reelected that has normalized it, means that there isn't even the pressure that some workplaces felt to pretend that they cared anymore. So yes, it is not, in my view, it's not a matter of if, but when. You're going to have to decide whether or not you want to address something and if the risks are worth it.
Mm-hmm. So, we talk about retaliation and we'll continue on that path, but I also want to talk about when it's time to report, right? Because if we're living in this understanding that workplaces are inherently unfair, then many of us as Black people in the workplace are going to experience microaggressions and macroaggressions and all kinds of other things and out and out racism daily in all of our experiences sometimes. But at what point is it that you would recommend a Black professional actually go to the powers that be to report the occurrence? What does that look like? Does that mean as soon as somebody touches my hair, I report it? Does that mean when I'm left out of opportunity formally and I can prove that other people that didn't look like me weren't, then I report it? Is it a comment? Is it just the way I feel? I'm isolated. What warrants reporting it to the powers who be?
So this is almost a trick question, Chrissy, because there is never a good time. There is never a good time. And sometimes the answer is never. There are situations when you should start documenting, and at that point, you should automatically start calling an attorney, because you know that internally the report is going to get worse and worse for you. And so you have to have hard conversations sometimes with yourself, your family, to recognize that there are even times where you go in and report and you are immediately in some way put on some type of suspension, leave. Something now has occurred, right? That now you can't even work there. I mean, you could be terminated immediately. And so you have to decide, do I need this job? Do I have a backup plan? Is there a support system or a safety net for me before I report? And in some situations, there is never that situation available to you, and never an opportunity for you to report internally, but to immediately start seeking what it means to get guidance or counsel.
Yeah. Your thoughts, Tanya?
I think that it really boils down to, and this is limited by, of course, if you really, really need your job, and most people do, then that can change the analysis. But in most cases, it comes down to if your dignity is at stake, if your money is at stake, your future career earnings, or your job. So, when there is some concrete, real harm to you and your future prospects, or the racist behavior is such that you would not be comfortable with yourself if you didn't do something about it, then is when I think most people are probably probably have to make a complaint. And but understanding that it's not likely to change the workplace. It may change your specific situation, but a lot of people, we want to fight. We want to make things better, not just for ourselves. I mean, besides the fact that most of us are very reluctant to complain about race, the other piece is when we finally do, a lot of times it's because of our concerns about everybody else and the people who come after us. Mm-hmm. And absolutely. And I encourage people to rethink whether or not that, as admirable as it is, these places do not, it takes a lot. It takes a lot for workplaces that have cultures that have ignored racist behavior. It takes a lot for them to change. I used to say, people would come in and say, I want to take them down. I want to take the company down. I want to take the CEO down. And I used to say, it's impossible. Please stop setting me up for failure. We can't do that. But I'm now old enough and I've been doing this long enough that I've seen it happen twice. So you can do it. It's just incredibly rare. So I always encourage people to start from the premise of making sure that you can come out of the situation with your career intact and your dignity intact. Anything over top of and beyond that is outstanding. But first, we're just talking about making sure that you can leave this career experience with your professional future preserved, because many people don't come out of retaliatory situations with their careers intact, or at least significantly disrupted.
Yeah. And there are some, we'll get to some of the questions too, but there are also just some testimonies in the chat where people are talking about their experience in the workplace. I must say, and I don't, put myself forward as being the person that always has had it figured out, but I never went to HR to report anything, whether it was racial, mistreatment or an issue with hierarchy, a supervisor. I never went to HR on a job where I still wanted to work. I just never utilized that. And so I want to talk a little bit about HR, because many employees do believe that going to HR, human resources, automatically means that HR is acting as their personal advocate. And Tanya, you've already talked to us about HR's obligation to protect the organization. So what should employees realistically expect from HR when reporting either racism, things that have happened in the line of discrimination, or subsequent retaliation? What, if anything, can they actually expect from HR?
Yeah, so as an HR person, I think I want to see the good in us, but I think you have to recognize what kind of HR person you are dealing with, because not all of us are built the same. And so you do have folks who sit in the organization and their true mission and their true power and the true power that they wield is that they can help you. And then other organizations, they are paper pushers. And then in other organizations, they are puppets of the senior team. And so you have to understand who you're dealing with and how that person shows up. And once you recognize that, I think you need to act accordingly. And so the first thing that you should expect when you report something to HR is that HR is going to ask you a lot of questions. And this is not them saying that you're not telling the truth or them badgering you. This is saying, in order for me to take any action from here, I need more details. So there are going to be questions that sometimes annoy you, like the date, the time, who else was in the room? What else did the other witnesses in the room say? Were there cameras in that location? Can you tell me which corner of the room you were standing in? What were you wearing on that day? What were they wearing on that day? How many times has this happened? Who else has seen this happen? And it's because we need to understand, if there's going to be an investigation, I need to know, first off, who all is involved, and then what questions I need to ask to either validate or invalidate what you're saying. So you need to come prepared with this type of information and not to assume that this person in some way trying to poke holes in your complaint or your information that you're providing. The other thing, you're going to come to HR and you're probably going to say, can I keep this anonymous? And in most cases, the answer is no, you cannot. And it's not because that person doesn't want to protect you and your confidentiality. It's because the nature of what you're reporting automatically is going to implicate one or some people. And so you can't come and say, well, Chrissy did this or Tanya did this, and then expect me to be able to go back and reprimand this person if that is my intention without going to have a conversation with them. And just like I know, if they did those things to you, the second I say, well, did you do this to so-and-so, or was so-and-so in the room? They're going to know you told.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not that I went over there to say, oh, so-and-so came and told on you. It's because you asked very specific things or had very specific details that only you and this person knew happened, and it automatically implicates you. You're also going to say, well, I don't want you to tell my manager. If it involves your manager and we go to talk to your manager about whether or not they did this thing, guess what, team? They know you told.
Mm-hmm.
So there's only so much confidentiality you can expect. And then after that happens, it's human nature. You went and told on someone, HR went to follow up on the complaint. This person now is a human and they say, I didn't like that you told on me. And whether or not I want to treat you differently, it's inherent. The next time I see you, baby, I got at least, at the minimum, some scowly eyes for you. And maybe it starts there.
Yeah, absolutely.
Can I just play?
Yeah.
Can I just play devil's advocate and say, I a couple of years ago, a nonprofit hired me they had a sexual misconduct crisis, and I did 100, like almost 150 sexual misconduct investigations over a couple of year period. You'd be surprised how it is possible to, if you really want to get to the truth of something without pointing the finger at particular people, you can do it. Most HR folks don't have the resources. They don't have the support from management to be able to do it properly, but it can be done. If you're telling me, or you're saying that you believe that your supervisor is giving people different performance reviews or allowing race to impact their performance reviews, look at the records. Look at whether or not there are trends and patterns. I mean, HR really should be looking at, if you've had multiple complaints about the same supervisor, it might be him and not the people who are making the complaints. The Trump administration has changed, or is, I guess, attempting to change the requirements for contractors that receive federal funds. But one of the obligations that has historically come with that is the obligation to track those kinds of patterns and trends, and to identify problem departments and problem divisions and problem supervisors. And that is definitely one of the we got some management folks and executive level folks here. That is one of the most transparent and unsuccessful ways to deal with a problem supervisor. Fire them. Don't move them. After the second complaint, it's a pattern. If the complaints are substantiated, they're valid, fire them.
Mm-hmm.
And if I don't say anything, nobody remembers anything else that I say here today for a management perspective. We don't have to change hearts and minds to make the workplace inclusive. We just have to police the rules and apply them. When white people behave badly, fire them. Mm-hmm. They will get it, they will learn, and they will stop. But when you send them mixed signals, when you talk about values, and then nobody's actually meaningfully disciplined when they behave badly, then people don't have an incentive to change. You put their employment on the line, they will stop. And I don't need them to be at my cookout. I just need them to not use the N-word at work. I just need them to not have nooses in the workplace, right? I just need them to not talk to me about, kids in the inner city and use racist tropes to refer to Black children. I don't need to talk to them about what they do on the weekend. So, mm-hmm. I mean, the solutions are actually quite simple for organizations that actually want to solve the problem, but they don't really want, many of them, most of them, in my view, don't really want to solve the problem.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you so much for that. I also want to bring up, because we do a lot of partnering with the Maryland Commission on Civil Rights. So there are obviously some protected class areas in employment where if you're discriminated against, you can use them as a recourse. But where I want to take the conversation a little bit is into, even with that, a lot of times companies will gauge whether or not you are credible by how other Black professionals in the workplace account for their experience, right? And so sometimes, and this has certainly happened to me in my career, where I know I have experienced racism in the workplace and I've gone to address it, and they're able to say, but Tyrone, is a vice president, or Tyrone doesn't have that same experience, or Tyrone, or worse yet, Tyrone and I have talked about it ad nauseum, and we lockstep about how we have been treated. And, I step forward to say something and they go to talk to Tyrone and he does not, right. He does not share that experience. Tyrone is wonderful. Everything's great, or whatever else. And in many ways, it serves to discount what I'm reporting. I want to talk a little bit about that, and then let's go to the chat with some of the questions people have asked. What about when you're isolated, you're being retaliated against, facing punishment, and not believed because of other Black people in the workplace who refuse to be honest and be bold?
You should never assume that anyone else is going to put their name on paper for you. Never. And I don't think that makes them any less of an ally for you, but your situation is not their situation. And so maybe it's that Tyrone is a single dad and has no other support system. And so by him coming in on this claim to say that this happened to him, he loses his job just the way you lose your job. And so if you can't go in and make an argument just for yourself, that's a tough time for you to report. If you've not seen or had this experience, if you don't have enough evidence, another thing, if you are coming in to report on someone else's behalf and they've not yet reported, that's a lose situation. That person should be going in to fight their own battles primarily. And then if you are willing to serve as a witness to the situation or the incidents, then that's another story. But you should walk in there with enough things on your plate or in your documented journal just for the sake of yourself.
Thoughts, Tanya?
Yeah, I would say don't ask people for support unless they have offered, and lots of people do offer to provide support to coworkers. If you're gonna do it, put it on the white people, because they can vouch for what they've seen and heard, and surprisingly many of them will. Many of them will. And so you should not assume that they are all right with what's going on. Oftentimes in fact, you'll find that people will come to you and tell you that they have a problem with it. Awkwardly, sometimes they will complain on your behalf, and then everybody assumes it was you. So, it could be complicated. But yeah, if you're gonna ask people who haven't volunteered, ask the white people. The other thing I would just say is that it's not an accident that there are people who will not back their coworkers up, because people who tend to survive and excel, or at least maintain, in organizations that have and tolerate a racist culture, are people who learn to adapt and have learned to go along, get along, and ignore it. Maybe they practice stoicism and it doesn't upset them. Maybe they've gotten to the place where they found their niche in the company, where they are surrounded by a couple of people that they're good with, and they don't really have issues. Maybe they don't have dignity. I don't know. Maybe they really just can't leave. I don't know. But that's not a surprise. And there also are, you should understand, gatekeepers. There are companies that absolutely put people of color in roles where they have visibility that gives credence to, our HR folks found that this wasn't substantiated. And again, managers, if you're here, it doesn't matter what color your HR business partner is. If the HR business partner does or doesn't do their job, the investigation rises and falls on the merits of that investigation. So, and there used to be some confusion in the law on this, but now the law is very clear. The fact that a Black person says you weren't discriminated against does not matter. It does not. We look at the facts of what happened, and that's what determines whether or not this was discriminatory, and then if there was some subsequent retaliation.
So there's some questions and some chatter in the chat, and I love that. Keep that interaction going. One person said that they went to HR to ask for information to apply for FMLA for a surgery, and then right after that they eliminated the position. I'm assuming the question is, there's an assumption that was due to race. What rights do they have to that? Any response to that real quick?
With respect to the elimination of the position, probably nothing. There's probably no recourse. I mean, that's Sierra, maybe you have a different view, but it'd be difficult, particularly to connect that to race. It'd be very difficult to do that.
Yeah, I was going to say that exactly. I mean, that might be a really savvy business choice, right? And it could have been that they've been holding on to your job because they didn't want to terminate you, but now that you're leaving, we don't want to hold your job for another 12 weeks while you go out on leave. So I don't want to say that's the case, because there might be some things that make this person say that this is absolutely race-based. I mean, this could be the final straw on the camel's back here, that it really is race-based, and there's been other incidents surrounding this. But I think as an HR professional, when people come to me and report things, I always want to say, well, let's look at the other factors before we immediately jump there, because we lose a lot of merit sometimes in valid claims when the first thing that we put on the table is race. Let's talk about the other things. Could it be that this person genuinely doesn't like you personally?
Mhm.
Could it be that you are underperforming? Could it be that they really want to eliminate the role? So let's look at the whole picture and then decide if it really is race-based or some type of discrimination or some other type of bias that's happening. But I never want to lead with that because it's easier for us to find some other things first and maybe point there as the wrongdoing before we immediately jump to race. Because once you put race on it, people get super sensitive and maybe we now can't get resolved where we could have on some other factors.
Mhm. So there's a question in here about changing the law to make it easier to prove racist behavior in the workplace, and like what could that look like? How do we address that? If there anything about that, I'm asking the
So,
questions because
and
they're in here.
so I folks may have heard a lot of a lot of people were concerned about the Supreme Court's recent rulings in this area, and specifically, I think it's the it starts with an M. I'll remember it before we finish, but there's a case that everyone's saying, oh, this is going to be the end of race discrimination cases, because the court basically said that the standards that apply to white people and to reverse discrimination cases are the same standards that apply to cases that involve people who have traditionally been discriminated against, people of color. Most of the kind of talking heads think that that's terrible, and that there should be different standards. I actually think it's great, because when the Trump administration is gone, the law will be that any differential treatments is actionable. So retaliation and discrimination are different. For retaliation, in order for the adverse action that you experience to be actionable retaliation that an employer can be liable for, it has to be material, and something that would dissuade a reasonable worker from complaining in the future. For discrimination, just straight up, you treated me differently than someone of a different color, it just has to be different. So if you change my shift to a less popular shift, if you give out candy on Sundays and you don't give me candy, any differential treatment is actionable at Muldrow, and the Supreme Court has made that clear. They did it in a case where it benefited a white woman, but at the end of the day, that law is going to benefit people who look like us more than white people going forward. So I think there has, the short answer is I think there has been a change. I just don't think most lawyers realize that change is one that benefits people who look like us.
Mhm. Now, Sierra, you answered a question earlier, and you talked about how there was not a whole lot of safety in reporting the HR, or anonymity rather. So one of the questions asked, but what about the companies like Ethic, if they have a hotline where you can call into to report an incident? Now, I'm going to say, don't trust that. Don't trust any of it. But what is your response to that?
So let me tell you how an ethic hotline works. It works two ways. The first of which, you call this number and there is a third-party service on the back end. And if they paid for the upgraded ethic hotline, they will investigate this on the back end. That's the upgraded version. Your more typical version is they will triage things, perhaps send them to, you have an issue with your benefits. They'll send you the benefits phone number. More often what happens with that line is, as part of that triage, they will say, hey, Chrissy and Tanya called and reported X. And this is now going right back to the HR company or the HR employee or person that you absolutely tried to avoid having to have the conversation with. And so is there some safety there? Not really. I mean, maybe if you wanted to report anonymously something that happened or something that you saw, sure. But if you are specifically talking about yourself, your name and all the details that you provided to this hotline are going back to the HR person on site.
Absolutely. So let's talk about you've reported the racism. HR hopefully has followed policies. It doesn't mean that you have received any kind of fair consequence or outcomes to that. But what about the emotional costs? Like we talked a little bit about retaliation showing up in like performance reviews and, less favorable, shifts and those kind of things. But when we talk about like the emotional outcome, now you've reported racism, people are treating you differently, the job has you pinpointed on alert. How do you stay in that job, or do you, when you're in that type of situation and maybe even isolated?
Well, I would say that as soon as you see that the workplace, that a new employer has a culture of tolerance, that you should already be kind of looking for your long-term plan, and how you can use this to be the springboard for your next opportunity. And as an added bonus, one of the best ways to maximize your income is to move around. people who stay with an employer for a long period of time, they tend to have incomes that lag. So, a bonus of keeping abreast of your opportunities is there's many benefits. But the the toll is actually a lot more than emotional. I mean, it's physical, and we know that heart disease and colitis and all manner of physical ailments are connected to the stress of not traumatic, like really significant racist incidents, but the daily persistent things that happen and cause this kind of background stress in our lives. And I think that that's a bigger conversation, honestly, about health and how we process circumstances that are outside of our control and focus instead on the ones that are within our control. But certainly, complaining about racism at work, the biggest kind of hard consequence is the financial impact over the lifetime of a career can be catastrophic.
Hmm. I tell people all the time, yes, we have to provide for our families and all those kind of things, but sometimes culturally we can be conditioned to be so grateful to even have been chosen and to have had the opportunity that our loyalties lie in places that aren't built for our safety. I want to talk about when you should go outside. Now you've experienced racism, you've reported it. It either has not, resulted in the outcome you desired, or there's been retaliation. The organization has harmed you in all of these ways. When should you seek outside support or professional guidance? And that includes whether it's like, of course, typically like trusted peer colleagues, mentors, professional associations, but when is it time to get legal counsel?
I think people should talk to a lawyer immediately. And I would say, I do, my husband is my law partner and we practice the same area of law. We decided after President Trump was elected for a second term and started firing Black women in mass, we do free consultations, period. And it may not be more than 20 minutes, but we will give 20 minutes to anyone. And quite frankly, a lot of people, that's all they need to just understand, what are my rights in this situation? What is the practical advice? And you can right this ship. I mean, I know I probably sound very fatalistic in this discussion today because I don't have a lot of faith in or respect for senior leadership in most industries. But one of the best ways to protect yourself is to know your rights and make sure that when you are raising concerns, you're doing it with the right language to force them to do the right thing if you have the leverage to do that. And you can. I'll give you one quick example. We had a gentleman who was being treated differently than his coworkers. They wanted at a hospital that wanted him to shave off his beard. And he didn't want to shave his beard for religious reasons, but also because he's Black and he gets razor bumps on his face. They were not harassing Jewish coworkers who also keep beards for religious observance. And we helped him craft the right email to point that out in a way that wasn't confrontational, but pointed out the differential treatment. And he was certainly being managed to termination, and he's still there. So you can sometimes force them to right the ship.
Mm-hmm. Any thoughts, Sarah?
I think it's tough to think through what this looks like for you, and you're going to really have to decide the right route based on where you are today. I don't think there's a perfect answer for every situation. I think the emotional turmoil is significant, and I think it's important for you to find someone who will validate what you're saying, because sometimes others will act like they don't see it. And then I think the other thing is for you to start to build a team of folks outside of the organization. And probably more importantly is you should start looking for another job immediately before this starts to wear you down so much that you become bitter and bruised. And now it's hard for you to walk into someone else's organization because you are carrying such a negative experience on your back. And you know what that looks like when you see it, right? They're still bitter. They're still talking bad about their employer. They're still trying to figure out how to get them. And so just get out before you get that far gone. Don't let this take over your whole life. Figure out how to right the ship. And if you can't right the ship, leave.
Mm-hmm. So it's been named and agreed upon by a few people in the chat that Black people are placed in HR specifically to maintain the status quo. I want to keep that in the back of in your minds as we answer the next question. When we look at wanting to move to organizations who are willing to make more authentic commitments to all of their employees, right? To inclusivity, to fairness, to safety, and all of that. What should a proper process look like if a Black employee is naming racism as something they're experiencing in the workplace from the time they report it going forward? What would a good organization do to triage that situation? Let's go there and then we'll move on from that.
So the first thing that should happen is they should take your complaint seriously. And you should feel like when you're having this conversation, someone is actively engaged in listening to you. That's the first thing. That's what it starts to look like. From there, you should expect that they are asking you lots of questions. If they don't ask you questions and they yeah you to death, you know that didn't go well. Now, what I don't want you to think should happen is that you should see immediately Bob got walked out. That's not what's happening. It might go quiet for a little while. And during that time, if it's a good process, it's a fair process, this person is looking into your complaint. If it is egregious enough, you might see that Bob got walked out or Bob didn't come to work for a couple of days while this was going on. And depending on what Bob did or didn't do, Bob might not come back at all. That's the best case scenario for how the process would look. I would say that you should expect this to take somewhere between 5 and 10 business days, depending on what's happened or how many people are involved. I also want to be able to give a little bit of grace because if you come and report this to a one-person HR department on a Monday and it's payroll week, what do you think this person has to do? They have to make a decision whether or not they want to process payroll this week or do they want to investigate your complaint. And I'm not saying one is more important than the other, but the impact here is obvious. And so I just want you to be thoughtful in what that looks like. I think you should maintain your calmness and composure. You should follow up and check in where you think that you haven't heard back in a reasonable amount of time. And when you realize that it's not gone well, you need to decide what your next course of action is going to be. But I want you to be able to be thoughtful about what has to happen for the organization to move these kinds of pieces around.
Mm-hmm. And I'm interested too in what we haven't talked about is what happens, what about not going to HR? What about just taking care of it yourself directly? And what does that look like? I tell this story all the time that I was in a job and I worked with someone who was actually subordinate to me, a white woman, and she actually called me an angry Black woman, like used the word. She was like, "You are angry." And I reported it to HR and they did nothing. They talked about cultural difference and she was an international person. She didn't grow up in the States. So her connotation didn't mean the same. I mean, they excused it and I ended up having to work with her. And I remember thinking, and this is not professional advice, and I'm also not speaking on behalf of Associated Black Chicks, this is Chrissy, right? I remember thinking I should have never went to HR. What I should have done is pinned her up in the corner and taught her how to interact with me, right? Like in the only way that I could, and then denied it all later. What about that? And what are the risks of just, addressing people in real time, in real place, when they harm you, handling it in the moment? Is there protection for that?
I mean, Sierra, you would know. I think most policies that I've seen actually include if you feel comfortable, address it directly with the person, kind of language before they get into identifying other formal mechanisms for complaining. So, I mean, if you are so inclined and the company has that kind of policy, explicitly saying that you're encouraged to do that, as long as you do it in a way that can't be misconstrued or misportrayed as something that, is inappropriate, I think that that's great.
Mm-hmm. And that there are no witnesses. No, I'm just playing. Don't
well, I think you might want witnesses. But,
right.
People will say that you were yelling. People will say, I mean, it's crazy. It can be on video, they'll still say it.
It's a risky space, right? Because that's exactly right, Tanya. People will say you were yelling and you were overly angry. They will say you were aggressive in that moment. And so unless you are really prepared in the most, I know what's happening here manner, I understand that I'm on a stage and that everything I say and do from this moment forward is going to be used against me, I would tread lightly. For sure. I know every policy says that you can't touch anybody. And I think sometimes that's the first inclination. So that's your job automatically and they might press charges. So that's one thing. The backside of this is I absolutely do train and coach people on how to call people out. This is a real skill to be able to do in the workplace. And there is a way to do it. There is a way for you to say that I have tried to address this in the most professional ways with this person, and they continue to approach me and treat me in this manner. And then that is the documentation that you have on paper. Hey, in a meeting, someone said something that to me that was a microaggression. They were disrespectful to me. I tried to address it. 7 other people sitting at the table saw me or heard me say X, Y, and Z was an inappropriate statement. But one of the things that I will give you if you walk away with no other tips to address is when someone says something to you that is a microaggression or highly offensive, ask them to repeat it. Ask them to repeat it. I'm sorry, Tanya, what did you say? I don't think I heard you. Because now what's happened is if someone did not hear it in the room, you've now stopped the conversation to have everyone listen to this person say something that they should not say. And if they are so bold as to repeat it again, you cannot say that the 6 other people on this call or the 30 other people in the room cannot say they did not hear it. And in most situations today, there will absolutely be a transcript.
I love that. I love that.
I love that. I'm literally writing that down because I think that's fantastic advice. Now, I would say the flip side of that, the advice for management and for HR professionals who are investigating and advising and having to discipline employees involved in these situations. My test is always, do you need to say that at work? Whatever the person said that was offensive, was it necessary for the business we're in? Because if it wasn't necessary and it's creating an uncomfortable environment for anybody, then the onus is on you to stop saying stuff that's unnecessary for work. Period. Like that, and when you break it down to that, to make it that simple, we don't need to talk about my hair. We don't need to talk about the kids in the city. We don't need to talk about any of that to get Amazon packages out the door, right? So when you take people to that really straightforward truism, it's hard to argue with.
So we are coming to a close. I want to make put some emphasis on one thing you said earlier, Tanya, when you said sometimes have the white people go and be the advocate. And so if there are our allies on the call today, if you have privilege, we always call on you to use it where you see wrongdoing happening in the workplace. But as we close, I would like to give each of you an opportunity to you've both given now 2 great pieces of advice really early. I'm not calling you to do something else and give something else. One piece of advice or another piece of guidance that you would give a Black professional who right now believes they are being punished for speaking up about racism. One piece of advice that you're going to leave them with on the call today. And we'll start with Sierra.
You should be documenting everything. Every conversation, when it happened, where were you standing, what time, what's the date, what was the context of the situation, who was standing near you. If you think you are in this situation and at some point you think you want to pursue legal action, having these type of details is going to be the difference between whether or not you walk away with something or you walk away with tears in your hand and jobless. And the other thing I would say on the back of this is that you need to find some type of counseling resource, someone to talk to, because this feels so hard when you are in it and it makes you feel like you are not that girl, you are not him. And it really does try to tick away at what you built as a professional in your career. So do not let that be how it is you interpret how you show up every day based on how they're treating you. Find an outlet elsewhere.
And Tanya?
If you think you are on your way out the door, they are trying to fire you, say it's discrimination. Say it's race discrimination. Say that person is a bigot. It will probably buy you 2 or 3 months before they fire you. Also, be creative about, or at least informed about what outlets exist for you to complain. People think about the EEOC. Most people have heard of the EEOC, but there are lots of industries that are subject to regulations by, like the Maryland Public Service Commission has jurisdiction over Baltimore Gas and Electric Company. They are much more worried about the PSC taking their money than they are the EEOC finding that they discriminated. So find the pain points for the employer and use that leverage if you have to.
I love that. We have learned so much today. Thank you both for joining us today, for lending your expertise. We very much appreciate it. And thank all of you for watching. Thank you for participating in the chat. And thank you for joining Associated Black Charities for our Equity at Work webinar. I am Chrissy Thornton for ABC, and we will talk to you all soon. Thanks so much.